Hello everyone. In today's video I'm going to show you how to make Choosy Bear's sweater, shirt and little grey shorts. As you can see, the sweater and the shirt are actually attached, they're not separate. Obviously everything comes off. The video is very detailed, but you will need the written pattern to enable you to get the stitch count right. So in the description bar below, I think you'll find it somewhere down here, you'll find a link to the actual bear tutorial video and also a link to my Etsy shop where you can buy the full written pattern for the bear and all the clothes. For the teddy and the outfits, I recommend the Scheepjes Soft Fun yarn, but if you can't find this in your country, then a similar DK or light worsted No. 3 yarn of your choice will be fine, as long as you use the same yarn for both the bear and the clothes. Otherwise you might find that the clothes don't fit. I'm using a 3mm hook for most of the clothes, but I'm also using a 2.5mm hook for the shirt, which needs to be slightly finer, and also the stitching around the jumper. I recommend a darning needle with a large eye but a sharp point, and also lots of stitch markers. Right, let's get started. Now for the sweater, which will be folded round for the bear, I did my 8 rows of single crochet, and you can count those. Each ridge, if you like, there's 4 ridges there, so there's 2 rows in each ridge. So that's 1, 2 up to the first, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then 7 and 8. And that row ended there. I've then done, if I show you my graph, which is what we're trying to achieve here for the sweater, I've then done 1, 2, 3, 4 rows with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 stitches in each row. So there's the first row, the second row, 1, 2, 3 and 4 rows. And now we will be turning the work. So now it's the right side out, and we want to start crocheting at this end here to do these 3 rows across, but of course we've ended here. So we've only got this little bit to do. So the way I do it, which is the neatest way I think, is to cut quite a long length of yarn, then pull it all the way through that stitch. Don't tie a knot, but just make sure that's nice and neat. Now take your darning needle, your sharp darning needle, and we want to start crocheting. I mean, you can just cast off and then start again here, but that leaves an extra tail. So I just thread my needle through the back of the work, and I want to come up on the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th stitch along, just at the back there. Whoops. Pull the yarn through. Just move that out of the way. Whoops, don't pull too tight. So you've still got 1, 2, 3, 4 on the 5th stitch. The yarn has come out. So we're now going to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 rows of just 3 single crochets. So we can now pull that yarn through, do a chain just to get it into the right position, and then go straight back in with a single crochet and do 1, 2 and 3. So that's your first row. Chain 1 and the second row 1, whoops, I'm catching, 2, whoops, and 3, turn, 1, this is your third row, 2 and 3. So it's now starting to come up the back of the arm, and then we'll continue on from there. So I did my 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 rows here, ended on the right side of the sweater because my tail is on the left, and I've just pulled through here. I didn't make a knot because a knot would make it messy, but I just pulled through my yarn and leave that long tail. And now we're going on to this part of the sweater. So for that, we miss out 5, I've had to add 1 in here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, miss off 5 single crochets and go into the 6th. Take a piece of yarn, leave a tail to weave in your ends later, pull through, make a chain just to attach the yarn to the pullover, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, yes, and then go straight back in and do your first single crochet. Now this row is going to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 single crochets along. So there's the first one, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 and 7. So this is now, we now want to form this V. So chain 1, turn your work, and now in the next row we only want 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 single crochets. So that means the first 2 we want to single crochet together to do a decrease, and there's your first stitch and there's your second stitch. That's your chain 1 there. So we don't do an invisible decrease in this case. We do an ordinary decrease, which is pull up a loop in the first one, pull up a loop in the second one, and pull through all 3. That leaves 1 stitch there. So that's your first 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Whoops, didn't go through both loops. 6. And now we're going to chain 1 and turn. So now we're back at this straight piece here, which is the arm. So we go straight back in, but we want to do a V at the other side, or start to create that V. So the last 2 stitches, that one and that one, we will do another decrease. And now we're at the V again. So when we chain 1 and turn, we need to do another decrease. So follow the pattern, and then at the end you'll end up with 3 stitches, and then you can finish up the rest of the other side of the arm. If you keep following the pattern, you very simply end up with this basic shape of a jumper that we will then turn and stitch up the sides. All your ends should be on the left. On the right side, that's where they finished, and your starting tail should be on the left, and this is the correct side of the jumper. So each one, the 2 back arms, we need to pull through and leave a very long tail, because we're going to sew up the arms using that tail. And then the other front arms we can pull through neatly. And now we're just going to sew in all the ends. Now, to make that look like a neat finish on the two front ones, because we don't need those tails, simply turn over your work and push that through along the back 3 stitches, or back 2 stitches I've done. Don't pull too tight, but just finish that off. So you can see there's a final stitch there. There's your first, second, third, and that tail is just hidden there. And then we can cut that off like that. And do the same on the front on this side. And then if you turn it over to the back, you can see where you attached your yarn in the other places. And you need to weave in these ends just by pulling it and then making sure it's neatly tucked away in the back stitches. Oops. Like so. So I'll weave in all the other ends, leave that tail, and then I'll show you what we do to sew the arms together. Right, now we've left that tail because we're going to sew the back up with that. And we've left these 2 long tails because we're going to sew, keeping on the right side, fold backwards like that, and we're going to sew back to the front with the tail that you left. Now then, make sure you go through both stitches on both sides. So I'm going to go through both loops here and take it through back to the back again, so that when you open it up, you've got a nice firm stitch there. So that's going there. Then I'm coming through to the next one. I wonder if actually I might just do another one through there, because that's the edge and we need that to be quite firm because we're going to be crocheting across that edge later. So I'm just going to put another one in there. Whoops. Perfect. Then I'm going to go over to the next 2 stitches. Over to the next 2 straight through. And then I'm going to go through that again just to close off this edge here. So that's a neat fastening, and then just turn your work over and thread it through the back stitches just to weave in your ends. And cut your yarn. There you go. Yes, that's nice and neat. So now do that one, and then we'll go on to the next part. Right, I've finished those 2 arms on the top, and what we want to do next is a single crochet row all the way around the edge of the sweater and also around the inside of the arms. I don't like this sort of jagged edge that you get at the end of your crochet rows. It looks really messy. So if you put a single crochet row around that, it looks a lot neater. And you'll see when we start how much nicer it looks. So for that, I'm using a 2.5mm hook. Please excuse my hook. I have just tried to clean it with nail varnish remover to make it look nice for the camera. And top tip, never use nail varnish remover on your crochet hooks. So that's going to be a new hook I need. So please excuse that. Now I'm using a 2.5mm, not because I want the stitches to be smaller, but because it's much more pointed on the end and it's easy to get inside these rows. When you attach your yarn, simply go into that first row, go through both loops, pull up a loop, do a chain just to attach it, and then go straight back into the same space with a single crochet for your first stitch. So doing your first 4 stitches is very straightforward because you're working into existing crochet stitches. But as you get to the arm and you're now going to work up the side, there isn't an obvious place to go in. But as a rule, you need to put probably a single crochet in each single crochet row. So where you get like this obvious ridge, that's 2 single crochets in there, 2 rows of single crochet. So you want 2 single crochets in that row right on the edge. So let's go in there with our first one and keep them on the edge. Sorry, and don't go into an obvious big hole because that will create more of a hole. Just stay on the edge. Right, I've gone in there. I can't go in there because that's a knot, so I'm going to go just in next to it. Then I should be able to go just into the edge. I don't want to go in again into a big hole, so I'm going to go into the actual yarn itself. Then I'm going to go there. And just keep your stitches even and equally spaced and small, otherwise the fabric will start to gather up. And this, as I say, this neat crochet edging. Now you see here, we've got to a point where that's the only place I can go really, but it's not a very big hole, so I can just work into there and it won't look terrible. You see how neat this is looking now? So as we come round, this is particularly important. I can't go into a big knot because that's too much of a bunch of fabric, of yarn. So I'm going to go in just there with another single crochet. And at this stage, if you don't like the way it's looking, if you think you've got your stitches too big, then take it out and start again. Because we really do want this. This is what finishes off the garment. There's another one. Now then, it's always tricky. See, these you're going into where you've done a decrease, because I'm going down the V-neck now. And where you've done a decrease is this sort of bulk of yarn. So just carefully decide where you think each stitch, well, I literally can't go in there, so I'm going to have to go over the top of it, right on the edge. And then what we do want is a nice central part. I'm going to have to go in there, because at the V, this is where you want things to look really neat and tidy. Go in there, see what that looks like. and then at the side. And then we can take a look and see. I'm just trying, I don't want to make a great big hole there, so I'm going to just try and force my hook. Whoa, this is not easy. Just try to, it's going up the other side that's difficult. How are you doing? Look, that's looking really nice now. Might just go into that bit of a hole there. You know, if it's a little hole, that's fine. But if it's going to create a really big gap in the sweater, that's not good. There. If I show you what I've done so far, you can see how that starts to look just really neat and tidy around the outside. So do the same all the way round, and I'll see you when I get to the other side, and that's where we're going to create a buttonhole. Now, I've gone round all the way around the top and all the way down and round the other side. And again, those 4 stitches at the end are really easy to do because you're working into crochet stitches. So here's my last one. Then we want to make a little loop at the end for a buttonhole. So just chain 1, 2, 3, I think 4 stitches, 4 chains, sorry. And then cut your yarn, pull through that chain, get a darning needle, and then we want to sew quite securely into a loop into the row below that chain. So I'm going to go so that it looks neat and it doesn't, I'm going to go through the top, just on the edge there, pull that through so that you can see that the chain sort of continues round like that. So that's through there, and then I'm going to go through again. This is where you need a sharp darning needle. And that makes a neat little buttonhole. And just simply thread the yarn through the back, and I will just thread it through a few stitches the other way so that it is very secure, because that'll get a lot of tugging, will the buttonhole. So that's like that, and cut your yarn close up. So go ahead and crochet around the arms. I would start in that bottom corner, and then you've got those 5 stitches to work into, and then do your neat single crochet row all the way around to the other side, and finish it with an invisible stitch that I think I've shown you previously in videos, so that you don't see where that actually ends. I'll just show you how we do that invisible finish so you don't see a join, and we'll remind you how we do it. I've pulled through the yarn on that stitch, and then take your darning needle, that was your first stitch. That was the first stitch that you made to go round the arm. So just go through the back of that with your darning needle. Oops. And then go back through the middle of the previous one and just sort of digging into the back. Whoops. Like that. And then if you pull that, you can't see where you started or finished. Looks very neat. And of course, weave in all your ends. Before we close up the sweater, we need to do the stitching. I won't lie, it's a lot easier to do the stitching round the bottom than round the top, because round the bottom, again, you've got obvious stitches to work into to do this chain stitch, whereas you've got nothing to really guide you on the one at the top, so you've just got to be quite careful when doing that one. But let's start by doing the chain stitch round the bottom. So take your sweater, make sure it's the right side out, so the tail will be on the left, and turn it upside down. And what you're wanting to do is to not work along this bottom row here, because it'll be too close to the edge, but into the holes above that, sort of the second row along. And we take the red yarn, or whatever colour you want for your trim, and go into that first hole, pull up a loop, leave a long tail because we want to neatly fasten that in at the end. And then you just work along all the holes along that row. We'll tie that so it's tighter later, but go straight into the next hole, pull up a loop and pull through a loop. Now don't worry, we'll tighten that later. And keep going along, grabbing your yarn. Be very careful that you don't make these stitches too tight, or you'll start to gather up the sweater. So sort of guide yourself so that you pull your yarn over and you don't hold on to the yarn too tightly. And you just do that all the way along to the other side. Okay, so I'm at the end now, so cut your yarn, pull the tail all the way through, and then just make a little stitch just down the other side of that loop, and that will hold that in place. And then you can just weave the end anywhere through the back stitches. Actually looks quite nice on the other side when you do the bottom one. I mean, if you don't want to do this chain stitch because you find that too tricky, you could just do a simple running stitch, but I just think the chain stitch gives it that little bit extra. Right, so now we're going to work on the V, and I'm dreading doing this on camera because it's something you've got to take really slowly and do each stitch slowly, and we need to do it with a darning needle because it's too difficult to do it with a crochet needle. So let's see how we go. So let's move on to the neck. Now take this slowly. If you don't like a stitch that you've put in, take it out immediately and redo it. This time we need to use a darning needle. So I've got a darning needle and I've taken a long piece of yarn, and we need to start in the middle because we want that to be really neat at that corner there. So come as far down. I mean, I know we've got the single crochet stitches around the edge, but we can't really follow those exactly, because each one would be slightly different because we were trying to fit them into certain places. So begin by coming down to about here, because if you think about it, you want your line to go up there and up there. So you need to start, don't start your first stitch up here. You want it all the way down here, a good first one stitch below. And we're just going to neatly put in there, not through the holes, but through the stitch. Just a single running stitch. Sort of hold on to your piece as you're pulling your stitches through so that you don't pull, I can't explain it really well, so you don't drag your stitches. So we want the stitches to be about this size. So I'm thinking my first stitch needs to come from here and loop under there. So I'm going to come, not through a hole, but through, and I don't want it to be too big. I'm going to come through there. I'm going to come through that first stitch. And this is where it's really good idea to hold on to the stitch as you're coming through it. And then back down through the same place. And there's your first, whoops, what am I doing? There's my first stitch, and I'm quite happy with that. So now I want the next stitch to be exactly the same size. So using your eye, I'm going to come up through here, and it's again, I'm going through, I'm not going to go through that hole because I think it'll create a bigger hole. I'm just going to come underneath it, pull your fabric, pull your yarn through, and now we need to go underneath this stitch. Now, if you've got a sharp darning needle, you might find that you'll go through the stitch, so you might find it easier to just put the back of the needle through that stitch, then pull and go back through where you came out. And there's your second stitch. So again, a similar distance apart, pull through, back of the needle, and then back in where we came from. And yes, that's not too bad. We're getting there. So if we can just keep that up, bit of a big hole there, but we'll see. Do the next one. Through the back of that one. And then back down where we came in. There. We start to sort of turn a corner now. I'm not going to go into that great big hole. I'm just going to go in just below it so that I don't create that big hole. You can see how once you get the next stitch in, this sort of neatens up a bit. Might be a good idea to practice first on a piece of fabric. There, pull that a bit tighter and back through there. Yes, I'm quite pleased with this. Right, I'm going to come up again. I'm going to come up through here. Is that a bit big? Should be all right. Holding on, because I've come through a stitch there, so I didn't want to drag that stitch out. Through that one. Give it a bit of a tug. And then down through this one. Be careful, that one's getting a bit big. Shall I do that one again? No. Well, it's a good idea. I'll take it out because then I can show you how you do take these stitches out. So if you're not happy, because if you can see, those stitches are all even and that's a big ugly one. So I'm going to just take that out. So the way to do that is pull through the last one you did very gently. And then pull the next one. And then you have to go round the back and pull out the running stitch. Yeah, so it's a good idea to show you what to do if you make a mistake. So I went in there and it turned out to be too big. So let me try coming a bit lower down this time. Woo. It's not easy. This is why you need a sharp darning needle, because you really are coming. Let me try there. That looks more like it. Through there. Back through there. That's better. It's worth spending a bit of time on this. The detail really matters. There you go. So I'm now going to go all the way around the top of the arm, and I'm going to come all the way down and along to the end there, and then we can do the other side. I've just actually, this little stitch that we put in here, I've just woven it in at the back to give it some strength, because now we're going to work up the other side of the cardigan and hook through that stitch and go all the way around the back like you did, and stop, you know, not right at the edge, because we're going to put a button there, but just close to the edge. Do be careful when you get down to here that your stitches really are balanced out. You don't want the last stitch to end there, because then you won't be able to go round the corner. The last stitch needs to end there. So just be aware as you're coming down here, are you spacing them out enough so that they will do that? Okay. Now we're at the shirt. Now the shirt, you'll probably realise, is not separate to the little sweater, because if I made a complete shirt and then put the sweater over the top, as with all crochet little clothing, pieces of clothing like this, it would be very, very bulky and look just not look to scale, if you like, on the bear. So I've made these individual components and then just sewn them in. And it really looks like it's a separate shirt. I've also used a 2.5mm hook. Again, excuse my grotty hook. Because we're trying to keep the bulk down and the shirt needs to look quite delicate against the stitches of the jumper. And the yarn I've used is the Soft Fun Scheepjes in lace, because I do think that if you use a white, it's a bit bright and brassy looking, and you get a more sort of vintage look with a sort of ecru creamy colour. So to start with, we're going to make little armholes, which are literally just little tubes that we'll stitch into place. And so start by making your chain, which I've done already, and leave a long tail, and you'll see why. We're going to use that for sewing up. Now, often when people make a tube, they would attach their chain here, but I actually prefer to do it a little differently to that and make a long row and then attach it. So going into and working in the second bump from the hook, there's the first bump and there's the second bump. And we're going to just work into there with our first single crochet and all the way along. Sorry, my computer's making noises. Whoops. Split the yarn there, we don't want to do that. All the way along, and I'll show you how we join it in the round. So when you've completed that row of single crochets, put a stitch marker in your last stitch so that you know that's the last stitch. And now we're going to join the chain. So rather than working back down this side, we'll join. So bring the crochet work round in, how do you say it, not away from you, because that would make it inside out, but towards you, and then go straight into that first. Just pull your yarn over the top of it, go straight into that first stitch there with a single crochet, one single crochet, and that's your first stitch, and the last stitch has got the stitch marker in it. And now we're going to just go round and around for 4 rows. Each time you come to the last stitch, take out the stitch marker and then put the stitch marker back in so you know that's your last stitch. And you can see when you've done 4 rows. Okay, I've now completed 4 rows. Don't worry about these bits, we'll sort those out in a minute. Now if we just tied off there, if I take the stitch, oh actually, that's my last stitch that I'm going into there. Now if we just tied off, there would be a very ugly sort of jump down onto the next row. It wouldn't look very neat. So again, what I love is the invisible stitch, or the invisible finish, which means that after your last stitch, do a slip stitch, because the slip stitch is lower than a single crochet stitch, so it brings it a bit closer. Then pull out, cut your yarn and pull it out. Now then, that slip stitch is going over that stitch that's underneath it, and now we need to make a false stitch over the top of this one, so that we end up with the same amount of stitches that we had in the first place. So take your darning needle. You're not going, that's that stitch there, you're not going to go into there because that would increase how many stitches you had. You're going to go through the next one, pull through your yarn. I'm catching it all the time, but it doesn't matter. Now we're going to go and finish it by going back down that stitch there and just through the back. And then you can't see hardly where the stitch ended and another one began. It's a very neat finish. So then just weave in your ends. I tend to do it like this if it's just a small amount. Whoops. Oh. I suppose you can turn it inside out and go through the back. weave in that end like that. And cut your tail really close. And then the other side, we just need to join that little gap there. Just with a single stitch through there, just to close that gap. Like that. Bring it up through there. And down again. And then weave that tail in. Now you can tell that it's not perfect, this side, but it doesn't matter because this is going on the inside of the sweater so you won't see it. And this last stitch here, you make sure is on the underside of the arm, on the bottom here, so that you don't see that. You get the nice neat side on the top. Right, we'll now do the front of the shirt. And now we're going to do the little shirt front. That's just a very, very neat and tidy triangle on the back that we attach the collar to. I'll start you off because it's just the bottom of the triangle, which is a bit complicated. And then it's very easy to go on from there. So I'm going to do it in a blue yarn because it's just easier to see against my background. I tried doing it in the cream colour and you couldn't see the stitches. So to make the triangle, very easy. We start with a slip knot, wrapping the short end around your finger so that the slip knot is now adjustable. And then we just do 2 chains, 1, 2. Now in that second chain from the hook, doesn't matter, you can go in there if you like. I'm going to go into the bump at the back of it. You need to do 3 single crochets. 1, 2 and 3. And there you have very, very mini wonky triangle. Chain one and turn, and then do 2 single crochets into each of those stitches. So that's 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6. Chain 1 and turn. We're not going to increase again because it'll all start to curve into a sort of semicircle. We're just going to do on the 3rd row 6 single crochets along. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6. Chain 1 and turn. Now the 4th row will be an increase row. So we're going to do an increase in the first stitch. 1 and 2. Then single crochet along. 1, 2, 3, 4, and then single crochet in the last stitch. 1 and 2. Chain 1 and turn. So that's your 1, 2, 3, 4th row. So we should have 8 now. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Sorry. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 and 8 stitches. So it's chain 1 and turn. This time we're not going to increase. In fact, I think I've chained twice now. Sorry. and we're going to do 8 stitches along. 7, 8. So that wasn't an increase row, so the next one will be. So chain 1 and turn, do an increase in the first stitch, 1, 2, single crochet all along, and then 2 in the last stitch, 9 and 10. Chain 1 and turn. That was an increase row, so this row we're just going to go along 10 single crochets, going straight back into that first one, 9 and 10. So that wasn't an increase row, so the next one will be, and this is your last row to give you 12 stitches on your 8th row, which is 2 at the beginning, 1, 2, single crochet along, 2 stitches at the end, which will give you 12 stitches. And remember, this is the right way out. I'm just going to pull hard on there just to get that neat at the end. There we go. This is the right way out because you can see this nice finished edge along the top there. If it's the wrong way round, then you don't see that. You just get a bumpy edge. So we want that nice finished edge at the top. So cut your yarn. You're not going to see these corners, but it's still nice to keep everything as flat as possible. And I've just pulled my yarn through. I haven't knotted it because I don't want a fat bulky knot on the end. Taking my darning needle, I'm just going to go through the back there just for a few stitches. Again, I'm not wanting to make this all horrid and bulky. I want it as flat as possible. Woven in that end, and then you've still got your 12 stitches, and that's important that you can count those 12 stitches for when we construct the shirt. And now the final stage is this collar, which is attached to the front part. I'm going to take you through every stage of the collar because it's kind of complicated. I'm also going to do it in a different colour so that you can see it better. The idea is to get 2 pieces, a left and a right, that are absolutely symmetrical. I can't tell you how long it took me to work this out, so that you get this nice little point at the end and that they both look absolutely equal. It isn't just a case of doing 2 pieces and then turning them around for the other one, because one's got to be left and the other one's got to be right, and I also want to have this nice stitching around it as well. Okay, so I've got this diagram here which I find easier to work with. So I'm going to start with the right collar, looking at the bear. And the first thing to do is 13 single crochets. I'll move that out of the way so it's not so complicated for you. Maybe I'll move it over there. Hang on. Right, and into the second bump from the hook, which there's your first bump, there's your second bump. This is on the back of the chain. We need to do a single crochet all the way along. 1, 2, 10, 11 and 12. So 13 chains will give you 12 stitches. Now, the first row, we simply chain 1, turn your work, and do 11 single crochets across. 1, 10, 11. Now then, in the last chain, or sorry, the last stitch, we're going to do 3 single crochets. So there's your last stitch. 1, 2, 3. And I'm slightly turning my work because we're not going to go down the side again. We're not going to go back the way we came, but we're going to work on the other side. And into that first stitch, there's your 3 there. Into that first stitch, which you can see clearly, I'm going to put, right, here we go, a half double, which is yarn over, insert your hook, pull through and pull through all 3. So that's a half double. I'm then going to do a double, yarn over, pull through a loop, pull through 2 and pull through another 2. And at the end of that double, we want to have a bit of a point, and they call it a pico stitch, and this is the way I do it, just to get a little point. So it doesn't curve, we want it to actually point. So to get a pico on the end of there, do 1 chain. Then, if you below there, you'll see 2, well, sort of 2 threads, if you like. So you're going to go through those 2 threads, pull through a loop, pull the loop through the 2 threads, and then also pull it through the thread that's on your hook. Now then, after that, we need to do 2 more double crochets into that same space. So there's 1 and there's 2. Whoops. Now you can see, I know that this collar's upside down, but we've got a nice little point there at the end of the collar. In the next stitch along, we're going to do another double crochet through both loops. Then we're going to do a half double, yarn over, pull through a loop, pull through all 3, and then we're going to do 8 single crochets along. Seven, whoops, 8 in there. Then in that last stitch, we're going to do 3 single crochets in that very last stitch. Whoops. Don't worry if this opens up, you'll be able to close it. 1, 2 and 3. Now if that's opened up a bit, you can pull on your yarn. Then we're going to do just 1 little single crochet just halfway up in the side, if you like, of your work. So just put your hook anywhere through there and do a single crochet. And that is the collar finished, and that's the right hand side collar. So to finish off and to make it look absolutely perfect, cut your yarn, pull your thread through, thread with a darning needle, and we're going to do one of those invisible finishes through this first stitch here on the other side. So put it through the back of there, pull through, and then just go through the back through the middle where the yarn came out of. And now you can't see any finish at the end. So as I say, weave in your ends, and that's now a perfect little collar. And I'll show you exactly what we do for the other side, for the collar on the other side. The left-hand collar starts off just like the right, with a chain of 13, one row of 12 single crochets, then another row of 11 single crochets, and then in that last stitch that's just there, we're going to put 3 single crochets. 1, 2, and 3. Now turning your work over, the third row you will do underneath, and that's another 3 single crochets into there, into the first stitch. 1, 2, and 3. Now we're going to do 8 single crochets along. And 8. Now then, in the last 3 stitches, we're going to work, because we're now working up to the point of the collar. So we're going to do a half double in the next stitch. So that's yarn over, pull through a loop, yarn over again and pull through all 3. Then in the next stitch, we're going to do a double. So that's yarn over, pull through a loop, yarn over again, pull through 2, yarn over again, pull through 2. Now we're going to go into the actual last stitch where we're going to be working this point. So first of all, in that last stitch, you need to do 2 double crochets. 1 and 2. At the end of this second double crochet, we're going to do that pico stitch, which is a chain, then a slip stitch through these 2 loops underneath the chain, slip stitch it through to the other loop on your hook. Whoops. And now we're going to work another double crochet into that same space. Woo, hang on, where's this working? Another double crochet into that same space, then a half double crochet. It's this that keeps getting in my way. A half double crochet into the same space. Then we're going to do a single crochet just in the side there, side of the work, and then all that, just pull that, I'm pulling this yarn to close up this hole here, then all that needs to be finished with an invisible finish by cutting your yarn, pulling through, and then finishing with an invisible stitch through there. Now we've got all the different components to the shirt. We've got a left and a right sleeve, a left and a right collar. Make sure that they are that way out and that they're not that way, because we want to have the nice chain stitch all the way around the top. And then make sure your little triangle's the right way out with this chain coming across the top, not like that. So that's the neat side. Okay, so the construction of the shirt is you just take some time over this. It's perfectly simple, but you just have to be a bit kind of careful with your stitches and keep them as neat as possible. So again, I've taken your green yarn, a decent length, not so long that it'll cause a knot. Then twist it at the end to release the fibres, and then you can pull one of those fibres out to use as sewing thread, and it's a lot more delicate. Keep the rest for the other parts of the shirt. Pop those over there. And now we can use a much smaller darning needle for some delicate stitches. I've done one sleeve. Let me just move those to one side. I've done one sleeve, and we need to make the other one match. Now the way we're going to place them is so that there's hardly any stitches available at the bottom. It's like almost just one row at the bottom, and then at the top you've got 1, 2, 3 and just the fourth one there. It will mean that inside you've got this bit of excess here, but that doesn't matter because it's quite hidden, and at least that's not a whole other shirt that you've got in there, making it really bulky. So taking the other arm, have a good look at it, and you'll notice that the worst part of it is where you joined the 2 stitches together, although I can't really see on this one. Yes, I think it's about there. Yes, you can see where I had to join the ring, so you are getting a bit of a bump there, so we don't want that to show. And then the other side is where we just finished off with that invisible stitch. So the worst is that side, the second worst is that side. So we want that to be the bottom of the arm underneath, and the very worst part to be tucked away inside. So the bit that you do see is a neat bit with this braid around the edge. So pop the arm in. As I say, we don't want to stick it in like this. This is where I'll lose my edge. We don't want to stick it in so it just sticks up like that. It has to be placed so that it looks like a real shirt in a sort of cap sleeve look, if you like, with just a tiny amount showing at the bottom. Now, yes, this is fiddly. If you're not good with a sewing needle, you're going to find this bit of pain, but let me show you how I did it so that it was easy. So what we want is a holding position for this bottom stitch so that it stays in place whilst we're doing the rest. So in the middle stitch of the arm, which I worked out to be about there, let's just get that in place. Pins won't do it because pins will make it, well, just too bulky. So you have to just use a little stitch in there as a sort of temporary measure, just so that doesn't move. Just going to go in and out of there twice, like that. So we've got. Now then, I know it seems ridiculous. You think, oh, well, might as well just continue round. But that's where this starts to move about and you can't get a nice shape like the other side. So I just cut the yarn now because that's held in place. We'll get rid of that in a minute because that's not proper stitches. And we start again at the top by pushing the sleeve out. So there's 4 rows showing. 1, 2, 3, 4 is the very end one, and we start at the very, very top. So start by weaving your thread away from where you're going to start. I'm starting on the top of the arm because then we can just cut that later and it won't show. And now I'm popping that back in. And we're going to go over this, over the stitches, so that these stitches stay the same all the way around. We're not going to come over here because you'll see the join, and we don't want that. We want to have invisible stitches. So that's going through the very, very top, through that stitch, and then corresponding, making sure it's right, just through the very top. Sorry, it's so difficult to do this on camera. Through the white, it's top of the sleeve. Just going to pull that through here. Right. Keep making sure that's pulled right out. I'm going to do another one just so that that yarn is really caught there. And now we can continue where we start to see a slope. Look at that. That's where I've caught a stitch. I'll get rid of that later. I'll sew that in. Have a look at the front. Make sure that will be perfectly nice there. And now we can just go in and out, making sure we catch the sleeve. Now then, I think it's easier if you come out of this part and do it this way up, because by doing this you can easily see that you've caught the white in there and that it's come through the green, and that you can go straight back over, looking to make sure you've caught the white at the very top. And I'm just going to do a really neat running stitch all the way round. Every now and again you might want to go back over a stitch so that the running stitch is secure and doesn't pull out. So I'm going to go back into there. And I might just go over that again because that makes that more secure. There we go, give it a bit of a tug. How are we looking? Yes, we want the slope round here, so I'm just shoving it in a bit for the next part. Let's go up there. Obviously it doesn't really matter so much what your stitches look like inside because they are hidden. And down there. Then getting closer, so we're going to slope it slightly through there. And down through there. You can see where this single thread really makes a difference. If this was a full piece of yarn, it would really show and look ugly. There's another one, and through there. So it really now looks like there's a proper ridge round there where the shirt comes out. So work all the way round, and then I'll show you what we do when we get to the top. Right, so I've gone round the whole of that sleeve, making sure we've got a bit of a slope here and that it matches. Keep checking the other side so that they look the same. Then I've gone round the last stitch a couple of times to make it secure, and then I'm just going to weave that yarn through anywhere on the green stitching, and then you can just cut that really close to the bottom Same with the tail that where we started, that can be cut very close and they disappear inside the sweater. So now we're on with the shirt front and the collar. And we do that by first of all attaching the collar to the shirt front. Again, if you count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and that was the 12th one that I just went in there with. There's 12, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That needs to be attached at the widest part of the collar there, and then this needs to be attached there with as much as that gap filled out as possible with a single stitch. So let's have a go at doing that again with a single strand of yarn. Right, so we'll start with the right hand collar first. So that's on the 6th stitch, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then I would say that the widest part is that 3rd stitch up from the actual picot point. So that's 1, 2, 3. So that needs to go onto there. And then just with a single strand of yarn, let's sew that so it covers up that 6th stitch completely. And let's sew that into place so that you can't see the stitch. So I'm just going to go back and forth over a single strand of yarn. So that you don't see this stitch at all. There we go, that might be enough actually. I'll do one more. I knew that would happen if I did one more stitch. So you kind of want this to be able to pivot so that you can angle it correctly over the shoulders and you've got some maneuverability there. That's why I've just done over and over again on one stitch just behind this loop so you can't see it, and it's secure but it does twist in whichever way you want it to. Then with the same thread, I'm just going to I can cut this one now short because I've gone over quite a few times. And now we need to get the second collar, 6 in, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right slap up against that one so you can't see any, and make sure it's absolutely symmetrical. So it might be worth just laying down flat first so that you get this. It's on that 3rd, 1, 2, 3. If it's that one we're going to stitch into place, then again just hold it securely, and it's as close as it can go. We can now go through the other stitch and go up and down through this one, right on the side of that stitch so you don't see it. It'll disappear behind the stitch. Oh wow, love getting a knot. There we go. Once you've got the first stitch in, you don't have to hold it so securely. Again there. I'm going to go over about 3 times. So that's held into place. And then just weave your end in through the back so that when you cut it, it's away from the stitches and it's neat and closed by. So there you've got this rather weird shape that we're now going to fix onto the sweater. Right, we need to position, make sure it's the right way out. Always check that you've got this nice braid showing at the front. We need to position this shirt front and the collar so that the shirt front is inside and the collar is on the outside. Now, I've tried various ways of doing this, and I would say that when you're placing the triangle on the inside, on the outside, you only really need to see a couple of rows. Can you see how that's got quite a big gap there? Otherwise, the whole shirt is bunched up underneath the neck of the teddy, and it just doesn't fit him properly. You know, if you have it up like this, you'll find that that doesn't actually fit the bear. And another way of doing this is to try it on the bear and place it to see where you think the best position for it will be. But I've just had a go, and I'd say you only want a tiny little bit showing there, and then the collar lying. And this is where you've got to get it absolutely central, because once this is placed in position, there's no manoeuvrability. I'm just going to move that down a bit. And at this point, I definitely would put in a pin so that that does not move. Right. So that looks pretty central. It'll really annoy me if it's not. So that's nice and central. So now what we need to do is fix the corners to the actual sweater. Now then, that pin you see has really made it bulk out that way. So I'm going to take this pin out and I'm going to put it in this way so that the sweater hasn't moved, and now you're getting a nice flat surface. Don't spread the collar out, but keep it really neat and closed like that, and then hold it with your finger. And then all we need to do is, whoops, where's my thread? Here we go. Single thread again. And all we need to do is sew those corners. Make sure I've got that straight into place. Fiddle about with it to make sure you get it absolutely perfect. Keep looking at the front to make sure, but then don't forget you can move these. Make sure it's level. And then I'm going to go just with a single stitch in and out through here. So if we start in that corner and then come up through the front, and then go back over a stitch, any stitch, it doesn't matter because you won't see it, and back through the corner. And now that's completely disappeared inside there. And now I'm going back up. And I'm going to go back down. Whoops. I'll do that again. Back up. And back down. Now, there's no need to sew that triangle all the way around, because it stops you from having a bit of manoeuvrability if you want to adjust it, and it's just not necessary. So I would just tie off your yarn by going round the back a little bit like so. Like that. Oops. And then you can cut the yarn quite short. And at this point, you see, you've got a chance to have another look to make sure you're happy with where the position is and if it's all symmetrical. So do all 3 corners, making sure that the jumper isn't spreading out when you do, as I say, when you do the next one. Just double check on that. And I'll see you when I've done the final corner. And now we need to stitch the collar to the shirt. Again, I would try this on the bear just to see where your bear head is and to where it's going to fit. But we want the collar, so don't pull it too tight. That's why it's a good idea to try it on the bear, because you don't want this bit curling up. So put it on the bear and just see where this actually lands comfortably. I've tried it on and it lands there, and it wants to just overlap the green very slightly. And then this time, obviously using white yarn, I'm just going to sew that edge to there. At the back of that stitch, just to hold this into place. Now, obviously you can go all the way up the collar, but I haven't done that. I've just left it sort of loose here, just because I didn't want it to all pull and be stiff. But if you're absolutely sure that you've got the collar in the right place, then it's okay to sew the collar completely on if you think it looks better like that. Whoops, back into there, back down there. And that's completely invisible, and that's moving round like that. Now then, when you put the bear on, if you're when you put the sweater on, if this starts to lift a bit, you can make some invisible stitches just in the base of the collar there, just to keep that in place as well. You know, just hide them there somewhere so it stays neat. But you don't want it, you want it to look like it's a proper collar that's overlapping a shirt. You don't want to make it look like it's sewn to the sweater. Okay, now we've just got to sew up the back and put the button on. This is your finished result. I've just teamed it up with the little skirt for now because I haven't done the shorts for this bear yet. So once I'd finished, I pulled this around to make it stretchier and so that it fits nicely over. And I actually pulled the arms as well, put my thumb in there and just made the arms, stretch those out so that they'd fit on the bear nicely. Then the back, of course, I've sewn on a button and then just one stitch. What's that there? That's it. Just one stitch with that end thread along the bottom there. So you've got a good opening for when you want to take the jumper on and off. Okay, and that's the little sweater. So I've now made 10 rows and it kind of looks like a little skirt at the moment. So we want to put in the legs. Now, before we do that, you'll notice that you've kind of landed not directly in the center. So just add a couple of stitches, it doesn't matter how many, just to get you right under that gap, which we're going to sew up later, so that we can now form the legs. So the first thing to do is to chain 3, 1, 2 and 3, and we're then going to miss 21 stitches around. So there's the first stitch. Let's count 21. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, and into that 22nd stitch we're going to put 2 single crochets. So that's 1 and 2. 2 single crochets in there. So then we need to do 1 single crochet in the next 19 stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4, 17, 18 and 19. We need to make an increase in that next stitch just next to the chain. 1 and 2. Increase in the next stitch and 1 single crochet in the 3 on one side, on this side of the chain. So that's 1 single crochet in there. And don't forget, you will be crocheting down the other side of the chain for the other leg shortly. And then doosh. Gosh, I can't just get in there. 1, 2, 3. And that is now the end of that leg. So we need to put a stitch marker in there because we're going to continue in the round onto the next row. So then that's row 11 on that leg. We did 10 rows up to here. That's row 11. And now we need to do up to row 16 on this one leg. So you're going straight back into that single crochet there. And so this will be row 12. And you're just going to go all the way around to the stitch marker. And then put the stitch marker back in again. And keep going until you've counted along here 16 rows. So there's 10, and then you need to do 6 more, so you've got 16 rows. And I'll see you when I've done 16. Right, I'm just finishing that 16th row. So that means that one leg has been done. So I'll take out that stitch marker, do 2 more. 1 and 2. Now we're not going to tie this off just yet because we're going to have to adjust where these legs end. So I'm just going to cut a long tail and leave that for later. So now we want to start the other leg, which if you're looking at the front of the shorts, the back's obviously got that little bit we're going to sew up later. So the left leg, we're going to start that, if you turn it upside down with the back facing you, that needs to start in that very next stitch next to that leg. So we pull up a loop, chain 1 just to attach it. Make sure you've got plenty of yarn left. And then work straight back in there with your first single crochet. So you need to do for this next leg is 21 stitches all the way around to the other side. So there's 2, 3, and I'll see you when we get to 21. I've done my 21 stitches all the way around the leg. We need to make sure there's 26 so it matches this leg. So I need to add 5 more. So to do this, I'm going to put another stitch just in the corner of the leg there. 1 single crochet. Then I'm going to do 3 across the other side of this chain. So you can just see the loops there. 1, 2, and 3, and then another stitch just in this corner, just here in that corner, and then that gives you 26 stitches all the way around, and that's your last stitch for that leg. So you need to pop the stitch marker back in there so you know that that's the last stitch. And then the next round we're going to work straight back in to that first stitch you made there and keep going all the way around for, well, until this all the way down the side measures 16 rows. And I'll see you after I've done the 16th row. I've ended on the 16th row on both sides now. And the reason I didn't finish them off is because, if you can see, they don't line up. And because we're crocheting around in a round, you end up with a big jump. So what I would do on both sides, so let's see, where are we? This is the front. So I'm going to start on the right leg on the inside. I'd just pull back a couple of stitches, 1, 2, to get you into the middle of the crutch, if you like. And I would end that now with a slip stitch into that stitch there, because that brings you closer to the other side. Then just pull through your yarn, don't pull too tight because you don't want to lose that stitch. There's the stitch that belongs over there. And now we're going to do an invisible finish over the top of this stitch. So get your sharp darning needle, thread, and then, so there's that stitch there. Now we're going to go over the top of this one, through the back of that one, there. Don't pull too tight because you're going to then go back down. Just catch the fabric at the back as well. And then that's your invisible finish. You can't see where one starts and the other finishes, and that makes a really neat finish right in the middle there. And then you can weave in your ends. So it's the same on the other side. I'm going to pull back 2 because I want to get right into the middle of that gusset. I'm going to finish with a slip stitch into that stitch. So again, don't lose that stitch, don't pull it too tight that it becomes a knot. Thread your needle. And then I'm going to do the invisible stitch over the top of this one and through this one. And then back over into there. Oops. And then again, pull that a bit tighter. Just got a bit of that stitch is poking through there, that's all right. And weave in all your ends. Now the back, again, we just want to close up the back as neatly as possible. I didn't leave myself a very long tail here, which wasn't very clever. We'll see how we manage. So I'm just going to again sort of make another invisible stitch, if you like, through there. And bring it back down there. Because this will have a, oh dear, this will have quite a lot of tension on it, so it needs to be a secure stitch. So I just go around that again, actually, and down through there. I don't know why I'm struggling with this needle. Whoops. Just to close up that gap, and again, weave in your ends, because that's going to get a lot of strain on it, because the shorts will be being pulled to put them on the bear. So you do want to have a secure finish just there. And those are the shorts done. Oh, well, the other thing I like to do is I like to fold them like you'd fold a pair of suit trousers. And then I like to like that. And then if you just steam iron them, but not too much, and for goodness sake, if you're using acrylic yarn, be very, very careful, just to give them that sort of perma-press look, like a smart pair of school shorts. If you want, you can even put a few darts in there just to sew them closed. But I like to see a bit of a crease there. But for goodness sake, don't melt your yarn. Okay, those are the shorts. Super.